Hey friends, Pastor Jeannie here. I am recording this from my mom's house in Manhattan, Kansas, and I'm so excited to put together this short devotional series to share with you a little bit about the four Gospels. I want to get this week started by asking you this question. Have you ever heard the same story told from several different perspectives? Let me tell you what I mean. So I'm friends with a lot of the ministry students at my school, and pastors tend to be pretty big storytellers. If you were in church last week, you heard Pastor Kyle tell a great story about some basketball players. Well, my friends are no exception. They love to tell stories. So often I hear the same story told from lots of different perspectives. So I want you to think about a time when maybe you've heard the same story told from lots of different perspectives, and think about the similarities and the differences between the different versions you may have heard. So you can pause the video to come up with your answer. If you're watching this with someone, you can share with one another your experience and what similarities and differences you noticed. Well, in a way, reading the Gospels is kind of like that. We get four different versions of the same story, Jesus' story. So I'm going to take a few minutes each week over the next few weeks to talk about the four different Gospels. There's looking at them together and looking at them individually, looking at their context and their authors and their original audiences and that type of thing. There's so much that can be said about the four Gospels, and so I'll try my best to keep the videos short so you don't have to listen to me ramble on. And I'll be the first to say that I'm not an expert. I've taken some classes, so I'll be using my notes and my textbooks to share with you some things that you may already know or may be totally new. And I'd be happy to help connect you with some of those resources as well if you're interested. So in this first week, I want to talk about why studying the Gospels is important. And I say studying, not just reading, because there's a difference, so we'll talk about that as well. And I want to give you a couple of main ways that you can study the Gospels. So first, I think it's important to take a minute to ask why one should study the four Gospels. So the Gospels are the story of Jesus, and having four different perspectives gives us a more rounded picture. And when we study the similarities and differences between each perspective, we see which parts are the most significant in general and which parts are the most significant to the individual gospel writers. And by that, I mean, in general, if something shows up in all four Gospels, it's probably pretty important. Or if, for the more specific, if one gospel writer spends a huge chunk of time talking about one thing, that was probably pretty important to that gospel writer or to their original audience or context that they were writing to. So reading the Gospels together, knowing their similarities and differences, helps us notice those things that stick out that are probably pretty important. There are two main ways that you can study the Gospels. The first is reading vertically, and that means looking at a Gospel within its own context. So reading vertically either means reading a Gospel in its entirety from start to finish, which is actually how the original audiences would have received the Gospels. So think about that the next time Pastor Robbie or Pastor Justin gets up and they'll read a couple verses. They could get up and read the entire book. So reading it from start to finish, looking at the context that way, or looking at the immediate context around a passage that you're studying. So what comes right before it, what comes right after it, within the same gospel book. That's reading vertically. The other way is reading horizontally. So reading horizontally is comparing similar passages from different gospel books side by side. So an example would be comparing Matthew's version of the birth of Jesus with Luke's version of the birth of Jesus. These two ways of reading the Gospels help the reader notice what each author intends to emphasize. Moving forward, one thing I want you to know, and I'll leave you with this to think about this week, is that the Gospels aren't simply this how to get to heaven handbook. That's important, but the Gospels are the story of Jesus, which is fundamental. We have to spend time learning the story of Jesus. And when we let our lives be transformed by the gospel, that story becomes our story as well. So over the next few weeks, I hope to equip you with some information and tools about the different Gospels that will help you discover more about that story. I'm really excited. And I want to let you know that I'm praying for you all this week. I hope you have a great week.